Welcome to the Blue Security Podcast, a weekly podcast for information security defenders, where we bring you discussions on best practices, tools, and implementation for enterprise security. Now, here are your hosts for today's show, Andy Jha and Adam Brewer.
Welcome to another episode of the Blue Security Podcast. I'm Andy, your host.
I'm Adam, your co-host.
This week, we have a few news stories to go over that I wanted to chat about. First off, there was some big news last week of the hack of the Trump campaign's presidential campaign, their emails. And Microsoft Threat Intelligence had shared in a blog that they had been tracking several activity or an increase in activity that points to Iran's intent to influence this year's presidential election in the United States. Google's threat analyst group also published a report following that on APT42, which is a group that is believed to be working for Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, or the IRGC, which is classified as a terrorist group by many countries, including the United States. And they are believed to be responsible for the hack. And also, according to Google's report, is also targeting the Democrats' presidential campaign. So on both fronts, they are trying to influence the U.S. presidential election. Microsoft's report stated that APT42, which Microsoft likes to dub with different names, they call this one Mint Sandstorm, targeted a high-ranking official on the presidential campaign by exploiting a hacked email account of another former senior advisor. And Google's report notes that APT42 successfully gained access to the personal Gmail account of a high-profile political consultant. Neither report actually named the official, but then Roger Stone, who had worked on the Trump campaign, revealed that he was contacted by Microsoft and the FBI that his accounts had been compromised. So one of the things is, obviously, like, this is a U.S. presidential election year. If you're working in politics right now, you should be extra vigilant. The vector of attack is believed to be a phishing email, and APT42 has numerous phishing tools, including ways to phish MFA codes. So definitely bolster your security. Try to use physical hardware tokens if at all possible. Be wary of those types of attacks if you're working in politics right now, because there are many nation states. Iran is just being one of them. I'm sure Russian hackers are also trying to do the same thing. Chinese hackers are probably doing the same thing. North Korea is probably doing the same thing. So all very have your guard up if that's the industry that you're working in today.
So, as I usually say frequently on this show, Andy and I both work for Microsoft when our field security sales. And when I first joined Microsoft, March of 2017, so almost 7.5 years ago now, one of the very first trips I got to do, about a month onto the job, was to Microsoft's CDOC, the Cyber Defense Operations Center, which is kind of Microsoft's internal SOC. But maybe the more interesting part of that visit was a trip to the Microsoft Digital Crimes Unit. And that's where Microsoft uses its global scope and scale to stop a lot of digital crimes. Most of them relate to child predators and child pornographers and those sorts of things. However, Microsoft has used our global scope and scale for many really good purposes, really with no return on investment for it or no capitalist means to do it, just the fact that it's the right thing to do because you have the resources to do it. And this is an example of that with Microsoft's global threat intelligence reporting on this. And Andy, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe Microsoft first started talking about these attempts by foreign nation states to influence the election. The warnings from Microsoft had started to come out before this Trump team had announced this specific attack. And I think obviously has continued after that, but we've been warning about it for a while now. And that's kind of a Captain Obvious thing, but still some deeper threat intelligence on exactly who it is. It's the Iranians, and those details have come out more recently. And on this show, I doubt we have a whole lot of folks who work on political campaigns listening, but if you are, again, thank you for being part of that. But we've talked about technologies like lockdown mode on iOS. We've talked about things like phishing resistant MFA. These are the technologies, if you're working on a political campaign, now is the time to avail yourselves to them. Now is the time to take that extra step, maybe toward what feels like paranoia, and just really do the work, really do that extra step of locking down your iOS devices, of being really vigilant about all of your logins and messages you're receiving, and trust but verify on almost anything you do. It sounds like, and again, this could have been partisan reporting, but that Mr. Stone had fallen victim to very run-of-the-mill, unsophisticated phishing attack. It doesn't sound like it was particularly clever or innovative or 0-day or anything else. It was pretty standard. Hey, click here, Anna Kournikova or whatever it was, like really basic stuff. So I don't know if that was just partisan reporting on Twitter. However, it's entirely possible, right? With a lot of folks working on these campaigns, they're not technologists. They come from other industries, other backgrounds. And so just may not have the familiarity we do, or folks that even work in enterprises with constant like phishing tests and all that have all the time. If you work for a big multinational company, you're probably getting a lot of training on this. But folks who maybe have made their business working in political advisory roles, those tend to kind of start up and get torn down, and they aren't these long lasting enterprises, and they may not have the sophisticated cybersecurity practice that you see in the private sector. I don't know. They should, but I don't know if they do. And so anyhow, interesting reporting, and a couple of links in the show notes to check out.
Another bit of news was a breach that was reported of the National Public Data Records. And so if you've been following the news, you may have seen this. But what happened was it was revealed that in April of this year, NPD records were compromised that contained personal information for billions of individuals. It's possible, it has been stated, that maybe everyone with a social security number probably has their information compromised. So NPD, if you're not familiar with them, National Public Data, is a data company that's based in Florida that provides background checks for employers, investigators, and other businesses that want to check people's backgrounds. So basically, they're just checking people's backgrounds. And they do searches on the internet for criminal records, vital records, social security traces, and other information. They do public scraping of that data, and they create files on consumers, and then they sell this to other businesses. They're data brokers. And because there's no national privacy law in the United States, they're not doing anything that's illegal. They're just collecting the information, even if we haven't really consented to that. And so that's just the way the United States works. They're scraping that data that's publicly available and then making files for each consumer, selling it off so that advertisers can target us with ads, essentially, to make money. So the cyber criminals who allegedly got this information, exfiltrated it, they put it up for free, at least a version of it, partially, on a hacking forum, but they claim to have more than 2.7 billion records in their possession, including the person's full name, address, date of birth, social security number, and phone number. NPD acknowledged the breach, and they noted that they were aware of a threat actor all the way back in December of 2023, but they weren't aware that anything was taken until this whole thing happened. And there's actually a lawsuit right now that is pending, that essentially against NPD for failure to guard this data. There is a website, and I'll put it in the show notes, but it is npd.pentester.com/search that you can go to. You don't have to put in any personal information other than your name, first name, last name, the state you lived in, and I think something else. but you don't have to like put in your social security number or anything like that. And it will kind of reveal what was, possibly in the database. And, like I went to it and I saw a bunch of like old addresses and old phone numbers that I used to have. For me, unfortunately, this is not my first time that my personal information was compromised because I was in the military. If you remember all the way back to 2015, the Office of Personnel Management was a huge breach. I think 10 million records or something like that of all military and civilian. Basically, what we did in the military for background checks there to like get your clearances. So pretty personal things that were leaked in that. And so I still have access to a credit check or a credit alerting system as part of that breach that I have access to. So one thing I do recommend is, if you don't have something, definitely take a look and maybe purchase a service that monitors your credit and helps you like see when there are new credit hits. I know I get an alert every time if I open a new credit card or get a new car loan or anything like that. It takes a hit because my credit has been checked, and so definitely have something like that. You can also obviously freeze your credit. You can call each credit bureau, TransUnion, I think it's called,
TransUnion,
Experian, and Equifax. Yep. So you got to do it all three separately, and I think there might be a fee depending on which one is, which one you're going to. But you want to, like, if you're gonna freeze it, you might as well call them. I know certain people who like they freeze their credit just as a baseline. Then they go and unfreeze it when they actually need to apply for something. And that's one way to do it. If you listen to Security Now, Steve Gibson, that's his method. He just keeps his credit frozen all the time and then unfreezes it if you need to get credit, because that's really not something that we have to do all the time. Like, you're not opening credit cards all the time, or at least you shouldn't be. or buying houses or buying cars, right? Like, you need it when you need it, and then when you don't need it, it's probably the majority of the time you don't need your credit to be unfrozen. So that's one possibility. I'm not an expert in this, but you do what you think is best. But definitely, like I said, pretty much everyone with a social security number is probably affected. So just go to the site, check it out, and see what kind of information was breached as part of that.
Great actionable advice here. We hear this all the time, and I think we've all become a little numb to it. I know I have, but it's a good reminder of having good hygiene around this. And I echo that suggestion by Mr. Gibson. I also know Leo Laporte, who runs the Twit network, also says the same thing. He keeps his frozen all the time unless he's actively applying. I believe technically under the law, you're supposed to be able to freeze and unfreeze your credit for free. They will try to upsell you. So you kind of have to, there's dark patterns and stuff like that. So you have to click the right thing, but I believe you can do it all online. It may be faster to call because, again, they're going to try to upsell you and steer you down different pathways you may not want to go, but it is theoretically possible. Also, with credit monitoring, I will say that's one thing where we've gotten to a really good place. If you have, at least for me, like I have multiple credit card vendors who all do it. Like when I applied for a mortgage recently, like almost 2 years ago now, I got 9 different emails from it, from like my bank, from this credit card, from this credit card, from this credit card, all saying, hey, did you mean to, make an inquiry here or apply for a loan? So you can get to a place, and honestly, that's better than the alternative, to where you definitely know if something happens. Now, you can make the decision for yourself. What's the better course of action? Do you want to try to undo that if you get a notification and run it down? Or do you want to prevent it from happening in the first place, but maybe have some hoops to jump through, like if you decide you want to go buy a car or something? Up to you. But I agree with those two suggestions, Andy. Freeze it if you can tolerate it, but if not, have at least robust monitoring in place, which sounds a lot like a lot of things with cybersecurity nowadays. And just a final note on this too, and obviously it was this company's business to aggregate data, but this proves for our listeners what you can take away from is when you talk to anybody inside your company, your default behavior should be, we want to keep nothing. We want to keep as little as possible. We are not in the business of warehousing data unless we absolutely have to have it, and we are delivering meaningful results from analyzing that data. If you're not doing that, don't keep it. And if you can be the voice in the room telling everyone else, you don't want to keep this, it's a liability, it's a risk, it's dangerous, we should keep as little as possible. That's a state we all need to get to in our portion of the world, in our enterprises. Now, we're not going to solve companies like this with the very limited, if any, regulation in the United States around data aggregation and data collection. However, maybe the tides of change will start to happen. Who knows? But when you see things like recently, did you hear about this? Not to go on a tangent, but General Motors, now modern cars all have a whole bunch of telemetry, and they capture basically everything you do when you drive the car. Oh, you accelerated hard. Oh, you braked hard. Oh, you turned hard. You pulled this many G's. General Motors took all of that and went and sold it to the insurance companies. And so people who had recent General Motors cars were finding like they were uninsurable, or they were getting massive insurance bills saying their rates had quadrupled, effectively because they were dangerous drivers and they hadn't been in any accidents. They hadn't had any police interactions. And it was because they had opted into something that said, oh, hey, do you mind if we, share your data because we're going to use it to make your services better? And it's like, making my services better does not involve telling my insurance company all of my driving habits without my consent, like informed consent. Like theoretically, you can say, well, it was in the terms and conditions that were 90 pages long and presented on your infotainment on your dashboard. Like, I think stuff like that, the more stuff like that happens, even in a very limited regulation country like the United States, and not that the European Union has been lighting things on fire in terms of great regulation around this stuff, but you could get to a point when you start messing with like Americans' cars and their insurance, like that's when people grab their torches and their pitchforks and go to Washington. Maybe after the presidential election, depending on who wins, we could start to see some meaningful reform in data collection and these data aggregators moving forward. I'm not going to hold my breath, but I will cross my fingers.
Yeah, and even being without policy involved, I mean, you can speak with your wallet, right? Like if I hear of a company misusing data like that, regardless, right, of what they thought the purpose of it, we're just trying to make money by selling this data. Oh, we can collect this data and then sell it and make money. But if you didn't think of the consequences of what that data, has, hearing that, I would never buy a GM car.
Well, and they got rid of CarPlay too. So like General Motors is just shooting themselves in the foot, and it's too bad because I think they're making interesting EVs right now. But my goodness, you get rid of CarPlay and you sell all my usage to the insurance companies, like we're done. Like I vote with my wallet, 100%.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, I did not hear that, but
it's a great story. Maybe we'll find a link to a news story and put in the show notes, just as a tangent. But it's people are suing them, of course, for that, and I think they have a right to. Where just because you buried it in 90 pages of legalese does not mean I informed consent to something like that, and why would I? And I mean, shame on them. Like shame on companies. I want to move on here, but like if our business is selling cars, then don't go try to make a cut of money by, well, we're going to sell data to insurance companies on the side. Like if you need that to be in business, then just don't be in business. Like that's just cruddy, man. I just don't like that.
And what's crazy to me is that like anytime you're collecting data, information security professionals should be involved and be like, at least how do we protect that data, right? And so I can't imagine that they were like okay with the company selling that data. I mean, maybe they didn't have a say, but like that is just being poor stewards of consumer data. Like I can't imagine that anyone if they knew, maybe they didn't know, but if anyone knew on the information security team, and this just kind of is like, if you are in information security and you are collecting consumer data or any type of data and storing it, that shouldn't be leaked. It shouldn't be sold. Like, that's just unethical to do that.
Well, and even for this NPD company, let's say there were cybersecurity professionals in the room there. I, again, just one last tangent here because this is so interesting. I'm on an Intune admins group on Facebook, which you can imagine is maybe not the best tier of Intune admins to ever walk the earth. No offense to folks in the group, but there's some weird stuff going on there. And inevitably, when someone comes in and asks any question, hey, we're trying to do this and this doesn't work, some guy walks in, and I'm going to say some bozo walks in and says, well, why don't you turn off two-factor authentication and see if it works? I'm like, hold on. No, like turning off 2FA is not on the table. Like, go find another way around it. Do not even give that to me as a troubleshooting suggestion at this point. But you realize like how many folks are running around saying stuff like that. And and then the guy followed up with, well, but if you have like IP-based restrictions, you're just as good. Remember, these people still have jobs, and they're still in many times position of authority and or position of influence. They are still out there, and we are still fighting the good fight, friends, listeners, and viewers of this show, on spreading the good word of 2FA always, no matter what, at a minimum, if not fish resistant methods moving forward. Anyhow, there's, even if you have the right people in the room, it doesn't mean they're the right people. Right. If that makes sense.
And speaking of MFA, great tangent, Adam, for our last
unplanned
topic.
Tangent too. I forgot this was the next topic. That's amazing.
Yeah. So speaking of MFA, and this happened to me this week because I logged into my demo tenant and was doing some work on Friday, and I kept on seeing this banner, and there was a distinct warning. So if you're an admin, you've probably seen this. But Microsoft started rolling out these warnings on Thursday that you need to enable MFA for your tenants, for your admins, global admins, I should say, so that users don't lose access to the admin portal. So all the global admins, which is what I was logged in as, was a global admin to my demo tenant. So everyone's going to need to enable MFA for administrative, if you want to do any type of administrative use in Entra or Microsoft,
Azure
Defender,
portal,
Intune,
any admin portal.
And so that warning is, it's going to go into effect. Microsoft's going to start enforcing that on October 15th. There is no choice. As part of Microsoft's new Secure Future initiative, and it's trying to ensure that all admin accounts are protected by enforcing MFA for all of these Azure sign-ins. If you need extra time, you can postpone the enforcement date until April 15th, 2025. You need to request that postponement between essentially now and October 15th, because if you don't do it by October 15th, it will be enforced. And so right now, everyone's getting this warning, 60 days and whatnot. You're getting it by email. You're getting it in the service notifications. If you don't delay it, then, and you don't enable MFA, on October 15th, any user that signs into administrative portal and a privileged portal, admin portal, they will be required to enroll in MFA in order to access that portal. MFA will also be required when you're trying to access services through the Intune Admin Center, as well as Microsoft Windows 365 cloud PCs. And then in early 2025, Microsoft is going to start enforcing MFA for Azure sign-ins for those who want to access Azure PowerShell, command line interface, CLI, the mobile app, and any infrastructure as code tools. The goal stated by one of our vice president, Alex Weinert, who's over identity security, is to have 100% multi-factor authentication. Given that a lot of the studies that Microsoft has done in this area, that MFA reduces the risk of an account takeover by over 99%. GitHub also started enforcing 2FA or MFA for all active developers in January as part of the same effort. So Microsoft owns GitHub, and they started doing this. So, I mean, I think for a lot of folks, this is pretty baseline, but obviously we have telemetry of all the tenants across the board. And whether you have a developer tenant or a test tenant or just like a demo tenant like mine, basically any tenant going forward, by default and without question, mandatory MFA will be enforced for all admins that are trying to access this. And I think that's a good thing. I mean, we've given a lot of slack over the few years. People can choose, but as part of this SFI, Microsoft is kind of just throwing down the gauntlet and leading by example and just saying, this is, we're going to start with MFA for all admins. It's just mandatory, no choice.
This Secure Future Initiative is the real deal. People have equated it to the Trustworthy Computing Initiative announced by Bill Gates in 2003. And it is right there with that in terms of a pivot the company, change the culture, turn on a dime kind of situation. It has impacted immeasurable things inside of Microsoft. It is practically not a day goes by that we aren't told, hey, this has changed. Why has this changed? Because of SFI. We're making this more strict. We are clearing everything out. We're going to start over, whatever the case may be. It's the real deal. And I know a lot of folks have, rightfully so, brought some healthy skepticism to it. But I will say you can ask anyone who works for Microsoft and they can say, this is the real deal. This is impacting my day-to-day. Also recently announced by our Chief People Officer, Kathleen Hogan. And this was previously said, but this is just following up on it. We have these internal review process. It's called a Connect. And part of your Connect is you have core priorities and you detail how you delivered against your core priorities. And so for every role, you have different core priorities. There's one that's shared across the company for diversity and inclusion. And moving forward, there will be a second one that is shared by the whole company, and that will be security. How did you meaningfully deliver impact against securing Microsoft and our customers? And so you will see even more of this moving forward as people must show impact against improving security to receive a fully fleshed out review. Like a good review at Microsoft requires you to show that in every corner of the company. And so that's really big. But this effort is the right thing to do. It's been the right thing to do for a long time. Understand it's impactful. But one of the things about the Secure Future Initiative, and we received a email from our CEO, Satya Nadella, who boiled it down in very simple terms, where he essentially wrote, if you are ever in a position where you have a choice between something else and security, your mandate is clear: do security. And so when it comes to things like, well, customers might get upset, but we could make them more secure, do security. We need to maintain legacy compatibility, or we could break legacy compatibility but make it more secure, do security. That's the absolute direction of this, and that's where this comes from. Again, if you are needing a little more time to prepare, you have processes that might be impacted by this, you can request an extension until April 15th. So you can get a half a year. You can get 6 more months to plan and prepare. Hopefully you don't need that. Hopefully you're already doing this. And I would bet the excellent listeners and viewers of this show are already doing this. But if you're not, you have the chance to get there. And just note, Andy called this out, but I'll reiterate it. For things like PowerShell, command line interface, infrastructure as code, the Azure mobile app, those things are not impacted by this change, and we will announce more on that in 2025. So if you have automation today and you're concerned about that breaking and it leverages PowerShell or CLI or infrastructure as code, you're good. That's not impacted by this. This is for interactive sign-ins where an admin is going into the portal, the GUI, to make changes, and they'll be required to use multi-factor authentication moving forward. So if this does impact you, if this is a change, may I suggest you go straight to phish-resistant multi-factor authentication. There's passkey support in public preview now with Microsoft Authenticator app. They are non-synchronized passkeys, so they're local to the device. Or, of course, there are FIDO2 security keys, which are the absolute best choice for administrators. And it's how we run our business at Microsoft, is everyone administering Microsoft services must use phish-resistant MFA. In fact, everyone at Microsoft now uses phish-resistant MFA because we made that change because, again, Secure Future Initiative. So this is positive. I apologize if it's impactful. Hopefully you can get up to speed by October 15. If you can't, you can buy yourself 6 more months, but it's go time. It's time for everyone to use multi-factor authentication, but especially privileged users.
Yeah. And like, I said in the beginning and Adam reiterated, this is just for admins who are accessing the portal. I'm interested though, because Adam, you mentioned breaking services with, PowerShell, CLI and all of that. If you have user accounts that are running some sort of service, now would probably be a good time to take a look at that. You don't have to transition, but you should move user accounts, like service accounts that you are essentially service accounts that are user accounts that might be running something. You should probably move those to service principals. Service principals are non-user accounts that are designed to run a service that you cannot interactively log into, and they can be granted roles. And so one of the worst things that you can do, which has been a practice for as long as Active Directory has been around, is to create user accounts, grant them privileged access to something, and then not have MFA because you can't run MFA, you can't interact it, sign in with MFA because it's a service account running a service and whatnot. So if you have those, and it's pretty common for organizations to have those, you definitely want to take a look at that and start planning for now and try to move those to service principals if you can.
And isn't there, I forget the name of it, is an Entra Managed ID that gives you additional security controls you can put around those as well? And that's an additional purchase, but it's very inexpensive and reasonable, especially because you probably don't have a ton of these accounts. And that helps you just do enhanced monitoring and security on top of that as well. So also something to look at, Entra Managed ID.
All right. Well, that's our show for this week. All of the links that we looked at for this show will be in the show notes, as well as my contact and Adam's contact. If you have any questions or topics you want us to talk about in the future, please just send us an email. And that's it. Thanks for watching and listening as always. We'll talk to you guys next week.
Thank you for listening to the Blue Security Podcast. Please check out the show notes, catch up on episodes you may have missed, and subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. Find Andy on Twitter @AJaw0 and Adam @AJ Brewer. See you at our next episode.